Hello, hello. We're back again. It's us, Jonathan. How are you doing?
I am doing quite well. It has been a lovely week. There's been some crazy stuff going on in the news that we're excited to share about, and just hanging out, having a good time. How are you, Tristan?
I'm doing great. I woke up this morning and I opened my front door and I actually felt the sun for the first time in a while, right? Like the air wasn't cold enough that I couldn't feel the sun. So I'm in a great mood today. I'm gonna go for a walk later. That's what
Nice.
I'm gonna do. But it has been a great week. And actually, I think the interesting thing is that I rate the weeks in cybersecurity now by how difficult it is to find stories for
Yes.
today that like excite us. And there's some interesting stories today, but there was nothing that I was like really crazy like, oh man, we have to talk about. Like if we don't cover that, it's going to be a problem. So I would say it's been a good week kind of all around, right? It's been a standard cybersecurity week. When it comes to cybersecurity, kind of no news is good news, I guess. But
Yeah.
that being said, we're back once again for the GPS Live for Friday, May 3rd. We are going to be talking about some cybersecurity stories that interest us. We would love to hear your comments on them as we talk. So if you're joining us live or if you're watching this on demand, go ahead and leave your comments. Let us know where you're watching from, what you're up to in the day, because Jonathan is in the East Coast and I'm in the West Coast. We're actually, I think, almost as far away from each other as you can possibly get.
We're polar opposites of the country.
Polar opposite corners of the country here. So, some of you may be eating lunch, some of you may have finished up, some of you may be running into that and trying to kind of get that early lunch break started by watching this. But let us know where you're coming from and let us know your thoughts on the stories as we talk about them, because we love interacting with you and talking to you about these stories as we cover them. But before we do have to get one thing out of the way, and that is the fact that the views and opinions that Jonathan and I express are our own. They do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of GuidePoint Security officially. We're just two guys talking about cybersecurity, and that's really important because we have our opinions on good cybersecurity practices, and I think those probably generally align pretty well with what industry standards would be, right? But we're talking about cybersecurity stories, and we're talking about attacks, and we're talking about things that could have happened, should have happened, might have happened. So it's important to put that out there that this is just us. We're just two guys talking about this. But that being said, Jonathan, I think this was the first story that we found was one that you pulled in and was pretty fascinating. So do you want to jump in on this one?
Sure thing. Yeah, earlier in the week, this kind of came across my radar, as I'm always keeping an eye out for good stories for the week, by the way. And if you have great stories, please send them our way. But this is an interesting one that has to do a lot with phishing and the USPS, or the U.S. Postal Office. What's happening here is, if you haven't been alive for the last year or so, you get these text messages, and the most common one that I'm getting now is a package alert. In fact, it's a delayed shipping notice, which happens to be my title today, thanks to Tristan. And these often say something along the lines of how you need to pick up your package post haste, and you need to visit this website. And it's some kind of typo squatted or USPS looking domain, intentionally meant to attack you, phish you, and cause damage. But what's interesting about this story, and kind of what really stood out to us as we're looking through it, is that there are moments during the calendar year where there is more traffic going to the malicious websites than the official USPS website itself, which is very concerning, because that implies that these phishing campaigns, or these smishing campaigns more specifically, are actually working, right?
Right, exactly. And what they found is, so the interesting, I think that what kicked off this investigation for, I believe it was Akamai, was doing this, is that actually one of their employees got a delayed shipping notification text, and they're like, hey, we should look into this. We should start doing a little bit of research into these fake sites. And what they found is, as they started tracking it, I believe in October of last year. So we're just going off of like a few months of data at this point. But the significant traffic starts piling in late November, because people are starting to look for Christmas shipping, and also one of the things that they noticed is that domains specifically targeted, or campaigns specifically targeted at trying to get people to go to sites for memorabilia and stamps, right? So like you've got that stamp collector in your life, right, and you're going to try and find some unique things to give them as gifts. Those sites started seeing a lot of traffic in that November timeframe as people started going out trying to find, how am I going to ship all these gifts and what are the unique things that I'm going to find to send to people. But also they compiled the most popular top level domains associated with these phishing sites. And the funny thing about it to me, right, to us working in cybersecurity, is that if I saw most of these as the top of the domain in the text, I would immediately just not go to it. But there's not that much awareness and visibility into what these domains should look like with people. In fact, I'm gonna go really quick just to the standard USPS website. So USPS.com, that's the United States Postal Service the web address. But so these top level domains that we saw the most of, or Akamai saw the most of, was .com was obviously the top one, easy to gain. But then you've got .top, .shop, .xyz, .org, and .info being the most common. Now .com, .org, I would absolutely expect someone could fall for. But some of these other ones, top, shop, XYZ, and info, I would not so readily identify as being an official site. But you had some thoughts on XYZ.
Yeah, historically, when the TLD XYZ first came out, it was very synonymous with, cybercrime, criminal activity, malware, all kinds of malicious things were happening with that particular TLD. Now it's kind of flattened out a little bit, and it's not as crazy known for that. But some of these, weird alternative TLDs, .world, right, .online, .shop, .today, things of that nature are also being leveraged and used. And one of the challenges is that some of these spin-off TLDs are extremely cheap to buy. We're talking just a couple dollars.
Yeah.
And now you own something that has the word USPS in the title somewhere, like USPS-ship.world. Nobody's going to register that ahead of time. And so criminals are taking advantage of not just the ability to snag up some of these lookalike domains, but also snag up extremely cheap TLDs. And so what happens is the web page, they're very convincing. I mean, from the images coming to us from the article from Bleeping Computer, I mean, it looks just like the official page, obviously with the intention to defraud. But beyond that, there's JavaScript components within the page. It's meant to look, feel, and flow as if it were the real thing. And so a lot of that was able to help these researchers fingerprint all of the domains that they've discovered, because there were certain commonalities across them. Because of that, a lot of this data was made available to us. And I totally agree about that kind of uptick factor. Historically, you would hope that the official website gets the most traffic year round. But once November kicks around and the Black Friday sales and the shipping and then leading up to the holiday sales and all that stuff, it really starts to take over. And I mean, look, I still get these text messages probably once a week today even. We did run a story, remember, about how these cyber criminals are now stepping away from SMS and they're moving to native. So stuff like iMessage, stuff like what's Android's RDS, right?
The RCS system and RCS. Being those especially RCS, right? That was a large push for.
Sorry, I'm an iPhoner. I know iMessage.
Apple's gonna support it eventually. But the RCS platform was advertised heavily by Google and others that we're saying like, hey, RCS for businesses, right? This will enhance your business communications. So people immediately right off the bat with iMessage and RCS started looking at, like that as a trusted source. They started getting texts, they started getting messages from organizations that they already trusted. So abusing that level of trust. Now we talked about before, some inherent security that's built into those platforms, like the fact that like iMessage will not allow you, or Apple will not allow you to register iMessage numbers and accounts without Apple devices. But that's not, if the payout for your phishing campaign, right, is as simple as buy a bunch of used iPhones and register them with accounts, then that's pretty easy. But what they found with this, there you go. I have a stack of old phones myself. what they found with this is that there were over the examined period, so just over the time that they started looking at this in 2023 till now, 1,128,146 thousand queries generated towards these malicious websites that they were tracking, which is just short of the 1,180,000 that went to the official USPS site. So almost parity there. And like you said, right, as we brought up a couple times, the change in traffic once you hit November, the graph that they have here to show this, the malicious domains visits to the malicious domains are more than double the actual visits to the legitimate USPS site. So throughout the rest of the year, right, you kind of have this like USPS to malicious is 2-1, but then as soon as you hit November up through December, the end of December, you've got malicious outnumbering 2-1. So all it takes, or even more than that, so all it takes is that like small window of time and that opportunity that they need to be able to just wildly outpace everything. And we see this a lot with phishing campaigns, right? Around the Olympics, there's always a lot of phishing that goes on for like official memorabilia and things like that, that are going out. And there's a lot of scams and campaigns that go on around that time. But I think something that's interesting about this, looking at it from like a policy perspective, we've had a lot of federal push recently towards more cybersecurity. We've actually got a story a little bit about that later today. But I think something that is just an interesting thought to me is that there is not any kind of restriction on buying domains that have like government entities within the domain name.
Some registrars will kind of like flag trademarks and certain things like that in names, but there's plenty of registrars out there that just are in it for the money.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's lots of things that that could be done here from a broader kind of cybersecurity, oversight. But I think the important thing here is these campaigns are obviously very successful. They're obviously very well provisioned, and so for your employees, right, you have to remember that not only is the risk there for just like general cybersecurity awareness, but come this time around November, December, these people are also going to be sitting at their work computers and stressing about, what kind of gifts they're going to buy, what kinds of things they're going to do, and getting these links and clicking on these links. So this also exposes pretty heavily like organizations to risk. And also the number of companies that do special, like they do special packages and stuff for employees around this time. That's going to be a key time that I think there's kind of that like bell curve that always happens with these kinds of things, right? You have the like vulnerability is initially discovered, attacks start to upswing. Oh, everyone now knows about the vulnerability, attacks are at the very peak. And so I think something that you might see with this is, hey, this has already been successful. Akamai publishes a massive report talking about how successful it is. We're going to see that continued upswing as more people are like, oh, I can do this easily, and jump on that bandwagon before we see that trail back off. So you've got to be vigilant about that. But let's move on to our next story. We're already burning through some time here. This is another one that you found and we both kind of like looked into a little bit. But this one's out my way. This is out in my neck of the woods a little bit more. London Drugs, a Canadian pharmacy and retail chain, has shut down operations at, I believe, over 80 retail stores across Western Canada due to a cyber attack. And the unfortunate thing is, this was several days ago that this shutdown initially started, and we still kind of only know just about that much about it.
Yeah, story coming to us from CBC, so Canada's main news bureau. Talks about a particular retail chain of pharmacies. And as you mentioned, over 80 locations are temporarily closed until further notice. And that's basically the messaging we're seeing. But it has been confirmed that this is based on a cyber attack. And without too much technical details here, we wanted to kind of get into some of the operational pause that we're starting to see when it comes to ransomware, especially because there's that threat of, we will encrypt your data, your company comes to a screeching halt unless you pay us. right? And we've covered on the show, about how ransomware is going to have single, double, and now even triple extortion attempts. And this is going to be one of those many extortion attempts. Now, again, there is no details, so we can only speculate on what is going on. But in Canada alone, although it's not a market we talk about very often, since 2018, they've seen over a double. I'm talking 30,000-ish police reported cybercrime incidents initially to over 70,000 police reported cybercrime incidents in just the past 5 to 6 years. And so it's definitely starting to affect not just us here in the United States market, but other Western countries abroad here in North America, but in general across different areas. And so yeah, it's gone from affecting maybe certain data within a company or whatever, to this is bleeding over to the customers of a pharmacy, right, of life-saving drugs and prescriptions that they need.
Yeah, and the like we've said multiple times already, right? We cannot confirm that this is a ransomware incident, because all that we know is that they've been shut down due to cybersecurity or a cyber attack. But the increased targeting of healthcare has been, right, this growing concern of especially with some very recent attacks. London Drugs is a retail, but it's also primarily a pharmacy, right? So there is patient and healthcare data that is included with that. Now they are saying they've said that they will continue to provide customers with urgent pharmacy care needs throughout this. But for the most part, the rest of their operations are shut down. So this is cutting off that vital source towards people, while also exposing some increased risk, right? As we look at attacks against healthcare, but specifically with Canada, while you were talking, I went and pulled up some of our recent the GuidePoint research and intelligence team ransomware reports that have been published. And so our last monthly report was in February. And then the last month's report was a quarterly report. But in February, right, Canada took the fourth spot in ransomware victims in the reports and everything that we were tracking. So the fourth most attacks were reported through Canada. And then if I look at the annual report covering all of last year, Canada was third in ransomware victims for all of the reports that we tracked. And so when we're looking at this kind of like Western focused or Western world focused and healthcare specifically, there's been this large upswing in these attacks, and it's only continued to grow. And when you start talking about cutting off vital resources for people, like their access to healthcare, this is starting to become a major consideration, not just for the U.S., but for all of these other kind of Western allied nations as well.
Now, one of the other key details here is kind of that fallout and the supply chain aspect. And I'm not talking necessarily SBOM like we're used to these days, but what happens is Canada Post, right, the equivalent of our USPS, is also affected by this, simply because a lot of times these London Drugs locations are a staple in the community, and they're also doubling as a post office. And so a postal system or some other business entity that you would think is completely unrelated to a pharmacy and storefront retail chain is also directly affected from this impact, because the stores are not open. Therefore, the smaller businesses that subside within them are also affected by these store closures. And so the fallout now is becoming broader than just the pharmacy company itself, but anybody else that does business with them, not just the suppliers of their goods that they retail out to their customers, but everybody along the way. And so this is, kind of shown its way to spider itself across these regional companies. And this isn't necessarily something new either. For instance, just a couple months ago, another discount chain reported its customer data was compromised in an incident. And so this is kind of like a rolling trend that is starting to affect a lot of us, whether it is in Canada or United States here.
Yeah. And going back to the GRIT report really quickly, just to pull up the specific statistics for healthcare, the February GRIT report, healthcare victims, there were over 30 that were reported just for that month. And then for the annual report, there were 158 specific healthcare vertical victims that GRIT report tracked just within the subset of data that the GRIT group is tracking here at GuidePoint. So Obviously, a growing problem as we move forward, and we're going to have to keep, I think, keep a close eye on more on more in the healthcare industry to kind of see these things, because um, I think something that maybe, you know, we need to be thinking about is the number of these attacks and incidents that kind of are just going unnoticed,
Mhm.
right? There's for every one attack or cybersecurity breach or incident that occurs, you kind of have to assume that there's you know, X number that are still just waiting in the wings and unnoticed so far because they haven't made any noise yet. And with healthcare being targeted so much, and with these ancillary businesses for for the healthcare industry, right? I don't know that we would necessarily classify London Drugs as a healthcare company, or if they would be classified as retail. But because of the intertwining of these businesses, like you were talking about, right, attacking one impacts all the others. Especially when you look at, like you were saying, operating as post office or operating as shipping centers, right? And the number of people that get their drugs delivered to them and rely on, you know, postal services to receive their drugs in a timely fashion. Like, all of this is becoming so interconnected.
Absolutely. Um, Now, this does give us the opportunity to segue, though, to
Yes,
our
it does.
third major story of the week, coming to us from the Register, talking about also a government's perspective on cybersecurity, especially that of a giant gaping GitLab account takeover hole. That is
Yeah,
quote directly from the article. I didn't make that up.
yeah.
But
Gaping GitLab account takeover hole is just, that's a phrase that I don't need to hear
no,
ever
never
again.
again.
Um,
But our everybody's favorite SZA is really putting a lot of focus, especially from a federal agency perspective, about this latest GitLab Community and Enterprise Edition vulnerability that has been marked as a 10 severity. Right?
Now, calling it latest is actually a little bit is a little bit hyperbolic, because this warning is coming actually a year after the vulnerability was first introduced, right? So
Mhm.
in an update almost exactly 1 year ago, GitLab had pushed out, I believe it was 16.1,
Mhm.
and it introduced this hole, this takeover hole, because it introduced the feature to be able to log in using a different or to recover your password using a different email address. So if you had lost access to your accounts and you needed to be able to get back in, you could go in and say, "Hey, send my password reset link to this email address instead." And allow me to log in. What this did, though, the problem that it introduced is that you can just create a specially crafted HTTP request that includes, like, send it to this email. So as long as you can find the repository and try to log in, you know, and then you fail on that, you can just send this specially crafted HTTP request that bypasses the authentication and just says, send a password reset link to this third email address that no one is monitoring, or at least no one related to this account is monitoring, um, and then reset the password from there. And that's a pretty huge flaw. But specifically, what CISA is doing here is they are saying, hey, they're mandating to federal agencies, you have to patch this, which is a little scary given the fact that, like, that, you know, a year after this bug was introduced, and I believe about 3 months, January, right? So
For
three or
the
four
patch,
months
yeah.
after the patch, that there has to be a warning put out at all to federal agencies saying, if you haven't patched this yet, you need to patch it. This is a pretty gaping flaw.
So this is definitely a lesson in vulnerability management here. And I'm not talking about necessarily host patching, but that third party patching, right? Or service patching. And
Yeah.
in this case, you know, something that has been published, like you said, 3 months a patch has been available. The CVE has been published. This has been known. And we're still going after and reminding people, if you haven't updated or patched this particular flaw, you need to do it because it is being exploited. Now, we were talking before the show, and you mentioned that it's not necessarily a perfect flaw. If you do have two-factor enabled,
Yeah.
that is still considered an appropriate mitigation. This is for a lot of those accounts that don't have two-factor enabled. And just because your GitLab is internal doesn't mean it can't be targeted. Come on.
Yeah.
You know, if it's discovered during a compromise of a host somewhere within your organization, it can be used as a pivot point to, you know, take over and run from there. And so, yeah, anything that's out there from 16.1.0
The
needs to
16.7.1, I think, right?
16 to 7. Yep, all the different major and minor workflows. Now,
Yeah.
there is a chart that's kind of keeping track of the different GitLab installations out there. And so we have seen a steep decline. But you were mentioning earlier, there's still somewhat of like 2,000 vulnerable environments that are still publicly accessible. This is not an invitation for you to go and show Dan where those are. Please don't. But the idea is that there's still a large number, and for CISA to say, hey, U.S. government agencies, what are we doing here? Why are we still leaving ourselves exposed 3 months later? Let's get a move on it. Let's get it chop.
Yep. Yeah, it's absolutely, this is something, this is obviously not just Fed related. If you're watching this and your organization uses GitLab at all, check to make sure that you are not on one of those vulnerable versions. The link to the stories, by the way, is in the comments for LinkedIn, so you can go to the register and take a look at the exact versions that are vulnerable and which versions have the patches enabled. But we've got a couple minutes left here to run through just a couple other quick shot stories. We did some actual real research trying to get into this first one for our rapid stories. Microsoft's April security update and non-security preview update breaks VPN connections. So don't install that, or if you have, you're going to need to roll that back. And what we were trying to figure out for so long before the show, I think we probably spent 10-15 minutes on this, was just trying to figure out, does this just break Microsoft's VPN itself, or is this more than just the Microsoft internal VPN that's built into the system? And it turns out it's any VPN looking for a TPM backed certificate.
Yeah. Thanks for diving into it, because the initial article that we pulled from Bleeping Computer says they haven't been able to discover the root cause. At least that's what Microsoft has said yet. But yes, TPM based, or TPM 2.0, is a requirement of Windows 11 these days. Yeah. And if software is seeking out that TPM to validate the hardware cryptographically, that it's like, it is the corporate laptop, this is how you validate and authorize your sign in on the VPN, then this is going to be a huge problem. I talked about a little bit of the technical aspects of how a third-party application that operates as a VPN proxies a traffic through it and then routes it back out, versus native Windows VPNs that could be IPsec tunnels and all the other fun stuff. But because this is basically a dependency on using hardware as authentication, or it's going to affect a lot of people. So we're just going to monitor it closely. But if you are affected by this VPN bug in the latest Windows update, please let us know in the comments below and what you're going to do about it. Apparently, you're supposed to just unroll the latest bundle.
Yeah, just get rid of the latest security bundle. Next one that we have is a rapid fire. Qantas, the Qantas app exposed sensitive traveler details to random users. You were looking into this one a bit.
Yeah, basically just imagine if you're looking at your phone and you're like, oh, let me get my boarding pass, and somebody else's boarding pass shows up there. Like, that's exactly kind of what's happening in this scenario. And I really found this interesting because it pivots off of something that I talked about at a local conference here in Florida called HackSpaceCon, where APIs tend to just leak. Like, they just dump too much information back to your mobile app. Now, it's up to your mobile app to decide what shows up on the screen and what it parses. But if you look at it from a transaction level and you look at the data in the packets and the payloads, you'd be surprised how much extra stuff is there that is absolutely unnecessary. So always keep an eye on those APIs, especially when leaky API endpoints are sharing more than they ever should.
And that
has been fixed, though.
And that goes both ways as well, right? We've seen so many stories recently about devices collecting too much information or more information than is necessary, specifically cars collecting a ton of biometric information and travel information and usage information and sending it back. But also there was the recent story of the guy who decided to do some snooping on his network traffic and started wondering why his clothes washing machine was sending back like 3 gigs of data.
It was the wash. They all talk. The washers, the thermostats, the TVs.
Yep.
Don't trust them.
Yep. And then finally, some good news to end on. Revil hacker behind Kaseya ransomware attack gets 13 years in prison, coming from Bleeping Computer. Ordered to pay $16 million in restitution for his involvement in the REvil ransomware operation. known by his alias as Robotnik, over 2,500 attacks demanding ransom payments, surpassing $700 million.
It's absolutely nuts. And remember that REvil was one of those affiliate related malware as a service kind of platforms where these individuals would go out and do the hacking, compromise, and delivery of the payload to the victim, and that's how they would get paid as an intermediary to, make expanding the victim presence. Rather than actually developing the tool themselves. So at any point in this ransomware, story, you have to understand they're coming after you. They're going to get you. It doesn't pay. They took all his Bitcoin too, apparently, right?
I think so, and that's the maximum potential sentence for all the accounts was 115 years. So 13 years is quite a reduction, and potentially the forfeiture of all property and financial assets. Now, at $700 million in payouts, being ordered to pay $16 million in restitution, right? That makes me wonder where the other $684 million dollars went. To these other affiliate campaigns, right? But they did seize another 39 Bitcoin and 6.1 million related to ransom payments. So that is a hefty number. 13 years. Some good news. We always love to see the bad guys get got. But that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining us for GPS Live for the week of May 3rd. If you've been watching this live, thank you so much for your time. If you're watching this on demand, again, let us know what you thought of the stories. Give us some comments to tell us what you'd like to see in the future. But until next week, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will see you all next time.